everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Bulldog Review podcast. Today, we have a reading from a very old poem, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Now, it is a cold and rainy November day, and that puts me in mind of one of my favorite passages from this poem of Sir Gawain. Now, like I said, this is a very old poem, and it's written in a very old style. It's written in Anglo-Saxon alliterative verse. Now, it was originally written in Middle English. And Middle English to me is one of the most fascinating time periods of the English language because there were some major changes taking place in the language and consequently in the poetry. You see, when the French invaded, they brought with them a lot of the French language and imported it into the Anglo Saxon or the Old English language that was spoken at the time. And when they did this, they brought a much richer rhyming vocabulary to the language. Now, to the dismay of many sort of Saxon patriots or maximalists, I actually think this was a very positive change. I think it introduced a richness and a breadth to the English language. But there is something to be said about for the darkness, the murkiness, the mystery of the older Anglo-Saxon language. And this is reflected in the poetry styles of each respective stream of English. So, on the one hand, you have Chaucer, who wrote thousands of lines in this rich, interwoven seven-line rhyme scheme. And the rhyme, it's very tight, very controlled, very bright, very lively. And then you have something like Sir Gawain, which was written at the same time, but in the older Anglo Saxon alliterative verse. So in Anglo Saxon poetry, you still have that kind of iambic thump that you'll find in Chaucer or Shakespeare. But the way the stressed alliterated syllables, they build in weight with these repeated consonants. And this translation by Simon Armitage does a really wonderful job of preserving the sort of feel and mood of the original Saxonate English, Middle English. So in this passage, Sir Gawain has taken an oath to seek out this monstrous green knight who will almost certainly kill him. And this is the story, this is the part of the story where he is actually going and seeking him all across England. If you want to read, if you want to know the full story of how this situation came to be, simply read the poem. It is absolutely outstanding. But I always think of this as a very cinematic scene. I imagine the winter landscape and the music swelling up as he rides from the castle across the land with these broad sweeping landscape shots interspersed with the people back at the castle mourning the loss of this noble knight. And as he rides across this frozen landscape, he encounters giants and monsters and does battle with them. And as we talked about last time, this is the time of the monsters and the ghouls. And this passage of the poem really takes place at the time it is now, which are the dreary days leading up to Christmas. And so, with all of that, we begin. Then, lance in hand held high, and got up in his gear, he bids them all goodbye one final time, he fears. Spiked with the spurs, the steed sped away with such force that the firestones sparked underfoot. All sighed at the sight, and with sinking hearts they whispered their worries to one another, concerned for their comrade. A pity, by Christ, if a lord so noble should lose his life. To find his equal on earth would be far from easy. Cleverer to have acted with caution and care, deemed him a duke, a title he was due, a leader of men, lord of many lands. Better than being battered into oblivion, beheaded by an ogre through headstrong pride. Who ever knew of any king to take counsel of a knight in the grip of an engrossing Christmas game? Warm tears welled up in their weary eyes as gallant Sir Gawain galloped from the court that day. He sped from home and hearth and went his winding way on steep and snaking paths, just as the story says, and this is where the music really swells up. Now through England's realm he rides and rides, Sir Gawain, God's servant, on his grim quest, passing long dark nights unloved and alone, foraging to feed, finding little to call food, with no friend but his horse through forests and hills, and only our Lord in heaven to hear him. He wanders near to the north of Wales, with the Isles of Anglesey off to the left. He keeps to the coast, fording each course, crossing at Holyhead and coming ashore in the wilds of the Wirral, whose wayward people both God and good men have quite given up on. And he constantly inquires of those he encounters if they know or not in this neck of the woods of a great green man or a green chapel. No, they say, never, never in their lives. They know of neither a chap nor a chapel so strange. He trails through bleak terrain, his mood and manner change at every twist and turn towards that chosen church. And here we have this wonderful illustration of him doing battle with some monster or a demon encountered in this bleak landscape. In a strange region he scales steep slopes. Far from his friends he cuts a lonely figure. Where he bridges a brook or wades through a waterway, it's no surprise to find that he faces a foe so foul or fierce he is bound to use force. So momentous are his travels among the mountains, to tell just a tenth would be a tall order. Here he scraps with serpents and snarling wolves. Here he tangles with wadwoes causing troubles in the crags, or with bulls and bears and the odd wild boar. Hard on his heels through the highlands come giants. Only diligence and faith in the face of death will keep him from becoming a corpse or carrion. And the wars were one thing, but the winter was worse. Clouds shed their cargo of crystallized rain, which froze as it fell to the frost-glazed earth. Nearly slain by sleet, he slept in his armor, bivouacked in the blackness amongst bare rocks where meltwater streamed from the snow-capped mountains, and high overhead hung chandeliers of ice. So in peril and pain, Sir Gawain made progress, crisscrossing the countryside until Christmas Eve. Then, at that time of tiding, he prayed to highest heaven. Let Mother Mary guide him towards some house or haven. That morning he moves on, skirts the mountainside, descends a deep forest densely overgrown, with vaulting hills to each half of the valley, and ancient oaks in huddles of hundreds. Hazel and hawthorn are interwoven, decked and draped in damp, shaggy moss, and bedraggled birds on bare black branches pipe pitifully into the piercing cold. Under cover of the canopy he girded Gringolet through mud and marshland, a man all alone, concerned and afraid in case he should fail in the worship of our deity, who on that date was born to the virgin Son to save our souls. He prayed with heavy heart, Father, hear me, and Lady Mary, our mother most mild, let me happen on some house where mass might be heard, and matins in the morning. Meekly I ask, and here I utter my pater, ave, and creed. He rides the path and prays, dismayed by his misdeeds, and signs Christ's cross and says, Be near me in my need. No sooner had he signed himself 3 times than he became aware in those woods of high walls in a moat on a mound, bordered by the boughs of thick trunked timber which trimmed the water, the most commanding castle a knight ever kept, positioned in a site of sweeping parkland with a palisade of pikes pitched in the earth in the midst of tall trees for 2 miles or more. He stopped and stared at one side of that stronghold as it sparkled and shone within shimmering oaks, and with helmet in hand he offered up thanks to Jesus and Saint Julian, both gentle and good, who had courteously heard him and heeded his cry. And to me, this is just, I mean, not only is it just a great, vivid passage of these battling with demons and monsters in the cold mountains in the middle of winter, but it is so symbolically rich because there are times in all of our lives, whether Christian or not, where we feel forsaken by God, where we feel abandoned by the world, where it seems as if God Himself has forgotten us and can't even hear our prayers. And that experience is very like to the experience of wandering in these wild, cold mountains. And in a lot of ways, we sort of symbolically inhabit that space at this time of the year when the world gets colder and we sort of have this descent towards Christmas. It's in some ways it's the dreariest, most dismal time of the year. But in the same way that the castle waits at the end of his road, so too does the Christ child wait at the end of our road. The person of Christ himself, both in Christmas and in his person. And so I would just say that in the gray days leading up to Advent and then Christmas, think of good Sir Gawain and stand strong. Thank you so much. I'll catch you on the next one.